Are you a mother, father, or you are involved in caring for children? If yes, then listen to Ask the Pediatricians every Thursday by 10 a.m. for insightful discussion on popular child health topics such as dangerous child health practices, immunization, infant feeding, developmental milestones, and so much more. You also get to ask questions on these topics and listen to answers to real-life child health issues by a pediatrician. Ask the Pediatricians Foundation is devoted to health education and information of parents and caregivers of children in the community to support you in raising healthy children. Don't miss Ask the Pediatricians with Dr. Bami because it's informative, educative, and interactive. Ask the Pediatricians Hour, the program for caring parents.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a fresh episode of Ask the Pediatrician Hour. I am Bimi Salaboide. I'm a pediatrician, and I'm your host for today. Ask the Pediatrician Hour is a program where you can learn about health issues that affect children, and we promote health of our children, and we also inform parents about common conditions, what to know about them, how to prevent them, and what to do if your children should have those conditions. Our goal is to ensure that no child dies from preventable causes of death in children. And this program is brought to you by Ask the Pediatricians Foundation, which is a non-profit organization based in Nigeria. We're committed to the well-being of all children globally, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where majority of our children are still dying from conditions that are largely preventable and treatable. So we do that through our health education and information programs on our social media platforms. And so you have any question about the health of your children, you can post it on our Ask the Pediatrician Facebook group. And also, even if you have about your own health, you can post on ATP Family Facebook group. We also do community medical outreaches periodically, and to communities where they have very limited access to pediatricians and healthcare professionals. So I really want to thank you so much for joining us today on whichever platform you're watching or listening to me. I want to say thank you. For those of you who are watching our YouTube channel, ATP TV, thank you for joining us today. And for those who are listening on my podcast platform, Ask Dr. Baby ATP, or if you are listening on Fresh Waves Radio, I also want to say thank you so much for joining us. And if you're watching on Facebook or either Ask the Pediatricians Foundation Facebook page or groups or Fresh Waves Radio Facebook page, I want to also say thank you for joining us. Please do us a favor. Invite your friends and family to listen and watch, and as well you can share the link with them. Join us in our drive, in our passion to ensure that parents are empowered with the evidence-based information when it comes to the health of their children, so that our children will live and not die. So thank you so much for joining us today. This week, actually on Monday, the 17th of April, was the World Hemophilia Day. It's a day set aside by the World Health Organization for us to create awareness about certain condition, and hemophilia is one of such condition. And I did promise during our ATP live session that I'll come and talk about it today, because this is a very important condition, and unfortunately some parents don't know about hemophilia. And so today you will get to know everything that you need to know about hemophilia. All right, so let's start. So I don't know whether you've heard of the word hemophilia, but I'm sure you heard the word hemoglobin, or you've heard other hemo word related. So hemo, or that beginning part of it, talks about blood. So when you hear the word Emo is always have to do with blood, all right? And so when we're talking about hemophilia, we're talking about conditions that has to do with bleeding. It's a bleeding disorder. In other words, children who have hemophilia, they tend to bleed a lot for one reason or the other. And what is the reason why they bleed? Actually, our blood is made up of so many things. If you break our blood, we have in it what we call the red blood cells. That is what makes the blood looks red, and that is the one that carries oxygen. And it is inside that red blood cell you have hemoglobin. And so when there are problems with red blood cells or hemoglobin, things like sickle cell anemia, then people like that may have low blood level or what we call anemia. But inside that blood, that liquid, that red liquid, we also have what we call the white blood cells. Now, the white blood cells are like our soldiers. They are the defense ministry of the body. So they help us to fight infections. So that is a white blood cell. There are different types of them, but we just group all of them together because that is not the emphasis today. We also have that liquid part of it where the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and some of the other factors, they are suspended. We call it plasma. Okay. Now, inside those liquid, so apart from the red blood cells and the white blood cells and the liquid, there are also some other factors. And there are factors that are responsible for what we call clotting. In other words, when you have a small injury or a cut, you will bleed, you will see blood coming out. But after a while, you see that bleeding will stop and something will kind of close or seal that bleeding from going on. That process is what we call clotting. And that clotting is made possible because of certain factors that are present in our blood. We call them clotting factors. There are different clotting factors. And so you have what we call factor 8, and we also have what we call factor 9, okay? And there are some other ones as well. So in some people, for certain genetic reasons, they do not have these clotting factors or they do not have enough of it. And such people, therefore, when they have cuts or injury, they are prone to bleeding for too long because those clotting factors are either not there or they are too small. They don't have them in the right quantity. So depending on how much of these clotting factors people have will determine how severe this bleeding condition is. So that bleeding condition, due to the deficiency or absence or reduction in quantity of the blood clotting factors, is what we call hemophilia. Okay, so hemophilia is a bleeding disorder and is due to the deficiency or reduction in quantity of clotting factors. And there are different types. Like I told you, there is factor 8, and we call that classical hemophilia or hemophilia A. And we also have factor 9. If there's the problem is a deficiency of factor 9, we call that hemophilia type B. There are even also hemophilia C. There are different types depending on all those other factors that may be reduced or absent. So the lower the amount of this clotting factor, the more likely the bleeding can occur and can be severe. And when we're talking about bleeding, we're not just talking of only when there's injury. These people can also, people with hemophilia, sometimes if they have very severe type, they can also bleed even when there is no injury. They can bleed in the brain, they can bleed anywhere. And you can imagine how serious that will be. All right, so I hope you now know what hemophilia is, okay? Usually it's a condition that is genetic. In other words, people are born with it. So most people that have hemophilia, they tend to start showing the signs even as children. All right. But very rarely, sometimes even adults can develop it, but that is a very rare case, But majority of people with hemophilia are born with it. Now, the question you want to ask me is that what is the cause of hemophilia? Why are some people born with very small quantity of these clotting factors that leads to the fact that they now have to do with, they have to bleed, or they don't stop bleeding quickly, and that means they can lose a lot of blood, and that can be very dangerous. So hemophilia is a genetic condition, so there are, I remember we've talked about genes before. All our body, all our functions, everything we do, all our body parts is made up from genes. So there are genes are the one that store the information of what we can do or what we cannot do. So how tall you are going to be, how fat you're going to be, how whether you're going to be black or white, or all those things are coded in genes. So there's also the genes that is responsible for production of these clotting factors. So if anything happened with these genes, what we call mutation, like anything goes wrong in those genes, then that means that instruction to produce the clotting factors will be lost, and or may be altered. So at the end of the day, the people who have those kind of genetic mutation will not be able to produce the clotting factors, the clotting protein, or the protein will not be able to work properly, or they may be missing completely, and that is what will lead to this reduction in the quantity of those clotting factors, or complete absence of those clotting factors. And now these genes, we all, if you remember your biology or integrated science, we talked about chromosomes, and the genes are inside the chromosomes. So the chromosome is like the big protein that contains all the genes, and we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and the 22 are what we call autosomes. They work with the rest of the body, and then we have two what we call sex chromosomes, the X and the Y. So the males have XY chromosomes, while females have the XX chromosomes. Now these genes that control blood clotting factors production, they are present in the X chromosome. Okay, you will now notice why that is important, because when we start talking about those who are likely going to have these bleeding disorders, so the genes for controlling blood clotting, they are present, or clotting protein, they are present in the X chromosome. So if a father does not because the gene is present in the X chromosome, I'm trying to explain it in a way that it's be easier for all of us to understand. Females have two X chromosomes, and male have only one X chromosome. So if a father does not have this bleeding factor, it means that his own X chromosome has the genes for producing blood clotting. Okay. However, it's possible for a mother not to have this problem, not to have a bleeding disorder, but the person may, because women have two chromosomes of the X, they may have one X chromosome that has the gene, and maybe another chromosome, X chromosome, that doesn't have the gene. So that woman will not have the disease, but that woman is carrying a deficient, is a carrier, what we call, the person is a carrier of the traits for having hemophilia. Though this woman herself does not have the problem, but because she only needs at least one X chromosome to be normal for her not to have the disease. But if she has one normal chromosome and one abnormal X chromosome that has the abnormality for producing the blood clotting factors, then when that woman marries a man who does not have it, the chances is that each time the children, they will get one half of the chromosomes from the father and half of the chromosome from the mother. So it means for every boy that this woman has, she's going to give them the X, because as a boy, you can only get the X from your mother, all right? So you get X from your mother and Y from your father, all right? So if the mother passes the X, that is the abnormal one in quotes, let's put it that way, then that means the boy has a Y chromosome, which is fine because the Y chromosome doesn't have anything to do with clotting factors. But if the boy gets the abnormal X chromosome from his mother, who is a carrier, then that boy is going to have hemophilia, because that boy has only one X chromosome and is the abnormal one. So that boy is going to have hemophilia, is going to have the disease. For the girls, they can either get a X that is normal from their mother and a X that is normal from the father. That particular girl will be fine. It's not a carrier and it also does not have the disease. But another girl may get the normal X chromosome from the father that is not having a problem, and a one abnormal X chromosome from a mother. So that girl will become a carrier. That girl is not likely going to have the disease, but will become a carrier. But another boy may be lucky to get the normal X chromosome from the mother and the normal, of course, the Y chromosome is fine from the father. Then that boy will not have the hemophiliac disease. So these are what we call sex-related genetic disorders that are carried on the X chromosomes. Usually the girls are the carriers, but the boys are the one that will tend to have the disease, because the boys are the one that tend to carry that will get the abnormal X chromosome anyway from their mother. Once in a while, it's also possible for the girls to also have the disease, because if there's some other medical reasons for that, because if the X chromosome that has the disease is the one that is very expressed, and the one that doesn't have disease is suppressed, then the girl can actually still have the disease, even though the girl has a normal and an abnormal. But I won't go into the details for you now. But I think what is important for us as parents is to understand how this condition comes about. So it's a genetic condition. It's a sex related genetic condition. It is carried on the X chromosomes. So because of that, all X related genetic conditions tend to affect boys. So hemophilia is a condition that tends to affect boys more, all right, rather than the girls. So the girls tend to be carrier. They will pass it on to the male offspring or children, whereas the men are the one that tend to have the disease. So that is what causes hemophilia. So people are born with it, especially, but it's commoner in males, and both the factor 8 and the factor 9 type. But we also have some other factors type, which is not X related, and those ones can affect both boys and girls the same way. All right. So that is how hemophilia happens. Okay. And so we have two types, like I mentioned earlier. We have the type A, or what we call the classic hemophilia, and that is due to factor 8 deficiency. And then we have the second type, which we call hemophilia B, or Christmas disease. And that one it has to do with Christmas. So it is called Christmas disease. It is caused by a deficiency of factor 9. So those are the two common types of hemophilia. But those are not the only clotting bleeding disorders or disorders that have to do with clotting factors. But when we talk about hemophilia, we're talking about factor 8 and factor 9. Factor 8, classic hemophilia, and factor 9 is a Christmas disease. So I hope we we've now understood how the condition happens. Now, the next question or the next thing we need to know is, what are the signs? What are the symptoms? How do you know if a child has hemophilia or not? Okay, so as I said, it's a bleeding disorder. The clotting factors are not there, or they are very small. So these people who have hemophilia, they all mark the most important symptom they have is that bleeding. They bleed excessively. Anybody can bleed, but they bleed and they don't stop bleeding for a long time. It's very difficult for them to stop bleeding, because the factors responsible for stopping bleeding, which is the clotting factors, are deficient in them. All right, so they can bleed into virtually any organs, but they tend to bleed more into the joints. So one of the features you see in boys who have hemophilia is that you see that their joints are swollen, especially because they've bled into the joint, and they don't really need to do any rough play or anything. Just normal activity can trigger a bleed in them, and so they can bleed into the joint, and this will cause pain and tightness, and this tends to affect what we call the big joints, the knees, the elbows, the ankles. So this is one of the sign that you see in children with hemophilia. And, if they keep on bleeding into their joint, that can cause that joints, to be destroyed. But the bleeding is the number one thing. So they can bleed in the joints, especially the big joints. They can bleed into the skin. So you just see as if they have a bruise, or they can bleed into the muscle and it will just swell up, and, that is, we call it hematoma. Then you see the blood so large inside, either inside the muscle or in the skin. They can bleed in their mouth and in their gums. And especially, for example, if they are, when children are cutting new tooth, they are losing the old one, just that loss of a tooth can lead to severe bleeding from the mouth. That is one of the signs of hemophilia. And also they can bleed after circumcision. In fact, this is one of the the earliest sign that we tend to see in children with hemophilia. In fact, that's our first inclination that this child may have hemophilia, is that after circumcision, especially in countries like Nigeria, the Jews, people that practice circumcision routinely for the boys, you will notice that these boys just keep bleeding and bleeding. And for newborn babies, they don't have so much blood. All their blood is like half of a Coke, of a bottle, a bottle of Coke, sorry. So that's about 240 mils, so they can lose all that blood so quickly, and that's it. So that is why we always recommend that you don't just do circumcision with just anyone, because sometimes we need to be sure, they need to make sure that after the procedure, especially if you are doing the traditional method of circumcision, that the bleeding stops, because boys with hemophilia will keep on bleeding and bleeding, and they may not stop bleeding. This bleeding is different from the one due to vitamin K deficiency, which is what we call vitamin K related bleeding disorder. Is different. In hemophilia, their own bleeding just is much more worse, and they can bleed for so long, and they can even have that the blood will cover the foreskin, and it may be difficult to remove it. So sometimes they can have bleeding after circumcision, after immunization. So you take the child for immunization, and then the child keeps bleeding. So please, as parents, be very alert. If you have a boy and you notice that after either immunization or circumcision or a minor injury, or for no reason they just start bleeding, or the blood, swollen joints and stuff, you may need to see the pediatricians, because that may be a sign of a child who has hemophilia, because they may not have other features. It won't be written across their forehead. They will not look different. It is when they start showing these signs, this excessive bleeding, or bleeding for no reason, or difficult to stop bleeding, then that's when we begin to know that this child may have hemophilia. Or sometimes they can even bleed in the brain, especially if it's a difficult delivery. Newborn babies, you see a newborn baby who is not a preterm baby and they've bled in the brain. Most of the time, it could be hemophilia. And also, they can bleed. You can see blood in the urine and blood in their stools. Again, nose bleeding. Some of the people that have all this nose bleeding that is so frequent and so difficult to stop, we need to rule out the fact that they don't have hemophilia, because that means they may have this blood clotting factors deficiency, and that may be the reason why they have nosebleed frequently. So these are the signs. So again, bleeding, bleeding that is excessive, bleeding that is difficult to control, bleeding that happens for no reason or for very trivial reasons. These are signs or symptoms that alert us to the possibility of hemophilia. Now, how common is hemophilia, or who are the people affected with hemophilia? Like I told us earlier, it tends to affect boys more because it's a X-related condition. It affects about 1 in every 5,000 males. So that is not a very rare condition. It's quite common. So a lot of people, and usually we always need to know children who have hemophilia, because we just have to, we'll talk about it under management. We need to know them. So most if you don't pick them up early, they may die, and nobody will even know why they died, because they may have bled in their brain and stuff. So it's something in countries that are advanced, they do routine screening for these conditions. They don't wait for the boys to bleed. They don't wait for it to happen. They screen all the children. And one of the for certain condition, we call it newborn screening. And one of the conditions they will screen for is hemophilia, and check for the blood clotting factors in these children. All right, so it's about 1 in 5,000 males. So it's a boys condition. Like girls could be carriers. Girls are the one that give it to the boys, but it's the boys that are affected. In the United States, for example, when they did a data analysis in 2012 to 2018, in a center that takes care of these children who have hemophilia, those who are treating them under the government service, there may be people that are getting their service privately. They found out that there are about 20,000 to 30,000 boys in United States alone who are living with hemophilia. Remember, this is just people who are getting treatment from a government funded service. So there's a lot. And hemophilia A, or the classic hemophilia due to factor VIII deficiency, is 4 times as common, is 4 times more common than hemophilia B. So hemophilia B, or Christmas disease or factor IX deficiency, is less common. Hemophilia A, or the classic one, is the more common form of hemophilia. And out of all the people that are affected, 50% of them will have the severe form of the disease. So the disease can be mild, moderate, severe, depending on the quantity of factor VIII that the person have. So people with mild disease most time will not bleed spontaneously. They will only bleed when there's a trigger, or they may not be able to stop the bleeding on time. But those with severe disease, those are the ones that will even bleed for no reason. There's no trigger. They can just bleed in the muscle, bleed in the skin, or bleed in the joints. So that is severe. And more than 50% of affected males actually have this severe disease. So we've talked about what hemophilia is. It's a bleeding disorder due to factor VIII or factor IX deficiency. We've talked about how it happened. It's a genetic condition. People that have it have no control over it. It's about the parents, at least the mother being a carrier and then passing it on through the X chromosome to the boys. It tends to affect boys mostly. It's an X-linked genetic disorder. And then we've talked about the symptoms and the signs that the hallmark is bleeding. You remember the clotting factors are the protein in the blood that makes sure that when we have a bleed or an injury, the bleeding doesn't continue forever, it will stop. So, but in this, in hemophiliacs, the clotting factors are reduced or deficient completely, and so they can stop the bleeding. And so bleeding from virtually any organ is what happens in children who have hemophilia. Okay, now we've talked about those who are affected, mostly boys, 1 in 5,000 boys. So how do we make a diagnosis of hemophilia? It's actually very straightforward, it's very simple. Once the child has a first major bleed, it is so dramatic enough for most of the time for doctors to know and to pick it up. So, and because it's a genetic condition, it's an X-linked condition, it runs in family. So people that have it, they already know that in our family, people tend to have this condition. So it's very is something that can easily be detected. And actually, in those people that have it in their family, they don't even wait for the boys to start having symptoms or bleeding. They should actually screen it. Like I said, we can do this test. We can know even before the child has any symptoms that they have a genetic condition. And some children, it's not running in their family. About 1/3 of children, it just started with that particular person. So it's what we call a new mutation. So those are the people that will tell you, oh, there's nobody in my family with this disease. That means it's just starting with that particular individual. So those are the ones that we tend to pick up after their first bleed, after their first traumatic bleed, that the doctors are like, no, this bleeding is suspicious of hemophilia, and then that is when we will go for testing. So we can do blood tests to look for the factor 8 itself. We can do blood tests to look for the factor 9, and we can actually also do the genetic test as well. So they are very straightforward, simple tests. And when we see it, we know, depending on the quantity of factor 8 or the quantity of factor 9 that we see in the blood, we will know how severe the condition is. So it's a very simple, easy to do diagnosis. Once we suspect it, we just go and do the assay for those factor 8 and factor 9. We can actually measure the quantity of them in the blood, and and we can say they are too reduced or they are not even present at all, and then we can confirm the diagnosis. All right, so I guess the next thing is, how do we treat children or adults as well who have hemophilia? All right, so we've talked about how to make the diagnosis. We've talked about what causes the symptoms and the signs. So what is the treatment? Luckily, this is one of those conditions that is treatable. Okay, this is one of those conditions that is treatable because we can actually replace the missing factors. So these children have factor 8 missing, or they have factor 9 missing, and that is because of the hemophilia. So luckily, we can actually get factor 8 from other people's blood, or we can actually produce it artificially in the lab, and then we can give it to the children. And as long as we're giving them the factor 8, replacing it from the outside. In other words, instead of them producing it by themselves, we give it to them, then they'll be fine. So that is the treatment. It's a very straightforward condition. It's a very straightforward treatment. The most important thing is for us to just pick it up on time to know where it is present. And like I said, in advanced countries, very rich countries, they screen all the children, and once they pick it up, then they put the child on replacement. So they just give them the factor 8. So as long as we're giving them factor 8, then they will clot properly. So usually we infuse it, we'll give it into the veins, okay? It's not something that they can drink. This is not something they rub on their body. It is something that we have to give into the veins. And that is why children who have hemophilia have to be known and have to be registered with the pediatric hematologists. Those are the specialists, pediatricians that support children who have hemophilia or any other blood condition. So when we say hematologists, remember the word hemo. Hemo has to do with blood. So hematologists are the specialists that deal with blood conditions, and we have pediatric hematologists that support children who have hemophilia. So luckily, we can produce factor VIII commercially. We can produce it as what we call concentrates. So they are available. They used to be very expensive, but luckily, I think a lot of non-profit organization are also supporting. And I think sometimes, I remember there was time we were giving it for free to the children in Nigeria. If I remember, I'm not sure what is going on right now. But if you suspect your child has hemophilia, or you know anybody that has hemophilia, please let them get in touch with the pediatric hematologist, and then they will be able to support them with how to get these factor concentrates and how to administer it. Usually for children, we usually have to bring them into the hospital to give it to them. But actually with time, we can actually teach them how to give it to themselves, and, they can give it. So usually we give them these drugs regularly, like prophylaxis, because once you give it to them after some time, it's going to wear off, and they are not producing it. The rest of us who don't have hemophilia, we produce our own factor VIII, we produce our own factor IX, because the genes is giving the information to the body to produce them. But for children with hemophilia, the gene is not working, or it has been altered, so you cannot give that instruction. So we give it to them, and then after a few weeks or so, it's going to wear off, and then we have to give another one again. So it's a chronic thing that they have to always get a replacement of their factor VIII. So we have to give them on a regular basis. Usually for those with mild ones, which means that they are producing a little, usually we'll give them when they have a bleed or something. But for those who have severe, they just have to be on it very frequently. And of course, we need to also take care of the children generally, good quality medical care to prevent complications, so that is why it's better the child is under the specialist. This is not a condition just any doctor or even just any pediatrician can manage. The child has to be on the specialist pediatric hematologists that take care of children with hemophilia. And sometimes they are usually in the teaching hospitals. For those in Africa, they are actually not in private. These are tertiary, these are advanced level of care. So it's important that parents are aware and they register their children and they go for regular treatment and prophylaxis. Okay, and these doctors will be monitoring the children, because sometimes the bleeding into the joints can deform the joints, so we may need to work with other doctors like the orthopedic doctors and all that. So they need to monitor them and make sure that the children fine, not just about the bleeding alone, but their general health. They are good, all right? So that's that. Unfortunately, when you give something that is not natural, if something that is artificial, the body kind of reacts to it and produce like what we call antibodies against it. Like, this is foreign, this is not from me. And so sometimes 15 to 20% of children or people with hemophilia will develop those antibodies that will work against the clotting factor that we're giving them. And so that is more challenging, really. So it becomes more difficult. So because we now have to start fighting the inhibitor, we fight the inhibitor, and we still need to give the clotting factors, and we need to try different routes, So people with inhibitors, those who develop antibodies against the the factor VIII concentrate, they tend to have more severe outcome. They tend to have their quality of life is reduced, because it's really a battle now. So we're fighting every hand, so that's the challenge. But luckily there are not so many, 15 to 20%, but it's quite still a significant number. But then again, the specialists, they know what to do. You just have to make sure you are seeing them, and then they can support the child. All right, so for the past more than 30 minutes, I've been talking about hemophilia. So today is just about creating the awareness. I don't know whether any of you listening to me, you suspect your child has hemophilia, or if you have lost a child for no apparent reason, you don't know, you may need to be sure, especially if it's a male child, we need to be sure that, especially if there's bleeding involved, you need to be sure that that child does not have hemophilia. So if you have listened to me today and you suspect that your child may have hemophilia, there is hope. It's a very easy, straightforward disease. We know the cause, we know what is missing, and we can replace what is missing. And so feel free to get in touch. You can just go to a teaching hospital, ask for the hematology department or the pediatric hematology for children, and then you can get a referral letter from your own general physician or doctor, the family doctors. They can refer you to the teaching hospital, and then they will be able to support your children. Like I said, I know that at the time those factors were so expensive and it was so difficult for us in the third world to get them, but I think we are able to get them now, and I think some agent organizations are supporting as well. So hopefully there's hope for children who have hemophilia, as long as we make the diagnosis on time and as long as we're able to treat them on time, and it's a lifelong treatment. We keep replacing the factor VIII. Luckily, not every person has a severe type. So some people have the mild to moderate type where they still produce some factor VIII themselves. So those ones, we only transfuse them or give them the factors, when they're in a situation that will make them bleed more. But for those with severe form, they just have to be getting their factor VIII on a regular basis. All right. So thank you so much for listening. If you have any question based on this topic, feel free to go to our Hacks the Pediatrician Facebook group. You can always post your questions there from Mondays to Saturdays, 24 hours daily. We are there and we are happy to answer your questions. And so sometimes it may take us up to 24 to 48 hours to respond to your questions. Please be patient with us. And on Sundays, you will not be able to post your questions because that's our break day. So we usually don't open our group on that day. And also, if you want to read about important tropical child health issues, you can go to our website. Our website is www.askthepediatricians.com. I'm sure you can see some of the names either behind me or on our flyers, or just Google it, askthepediatricians.com. You can read important topics that we've written about all these topics that we're discussing as well, for those of you who like to read. And if you like to listen, remember, even this episode and all the past episodes, you can still listen to them on my podcast, Ask Dr. Bemi ATP podcast. Just Google Ask Dr. Bemi ATP podcast, and then you can listen and not only about this topic of hemophilia, but all the other topics we've talked about. I think we talked about autism spectrum disorder last 2 weeks or so, and all the other topics we've talked about. I'm sure you're going to learn a lot. And you can, if you have any question you would like me to answer, you can, and you don't want to use the Facebook platform, or you can also email me. Just email me, Dr. Bemisala at askthepediatricians.com. Email me and I'll try and respond to them. Or if you have any particular topic that you would like us to talk about, maybe you think is so important to you, you'd like us to talk about that particular topic, feel free to send your request in as well to us on email, drbimisola@actpediatricians.com, or you can send us a WhatsApp message on our WhatsApp +234 9056 916818. Let me take that again. +234 9056 916818. Please do not send questions trying to have a conversation with us on WhatsApp, because we reserve that platform for our ATP clinics, for those who want to see our pediatricians privately. And so it's a paid service for that. But if you just want us to send us a message, we will receive the message. All right. So thank you so much for listening. And I want you to go ahead today and make sure that you talk to somebody about hemophilia. And if you know somebody with hemophilia, if you know any child with hemophilia, please show the boys some love. All right. Show them some love, and let's keep supporting them. And of course, in terms of prevention, I guess it is for those who it's a little bit tricky, really, for the females who are already carriers of the condition. I don't think there's much they can do about it. As long as they marry, the likelihood of them passing that gene to one of the boys is 50%. So it's 50% for each male pregnancy. But there are prenatal diagnosis options and stuff, but I'm not so sure how many people want to, I don't think that's an option, like terminating the life of a child because they have hemophilia. And luckily it's a condition that is treatable. So there's nothing much we can do in terms of prevention, but maybe those who are carriers just need to be aware and make sure that immediately they have a male child, that child is screened and enrolled into the management, be under the care of the specialist, so that if the child needs to be on replacement therapy with factor 8 or factor 9, that could be done. So I think that is all we can do in terms, and I'm sure that's a question that many people want to ask me, is this preventable and what can we do? Genetic conditions are a little bit tricky. Of course, scientists are working so hard, and we are getting to the era of what we call gene therapy, and it's still in research form right now, but we're hopeful, just like for sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, all these genetic conditions, cystic fibrosis, we are open and hopeful, and scientists are working so hard to see whether we can actually repair the gene in the cells, because that is the final solution. So if you can get to the genes and repair the gene, and then put in a new gene that will produce the factor 8 or the factor 9 right inside the body of these children, that will be the final solution. And I think we're getting there. We're getting close, okay? I think they're already doing some genetic therapy in terms of sickle cell anemia. There have been some promising results. So hopefully, maybe in another couple of years, or maybe we may be talking about final cure for hemophilia, sickle cell anemia, and all those other genetic conditions because of breakthrough with gene therapy. Finger crossed, but scientists are working so hard, so there's still hope at the end of the tunnel. All right. So thank you so much for listening to me. For those of you who are just joining us, please rewatch the video. And remember, we've been talking about hemophilia. It's a bleeding disorder. It's an X-linked genetic disorder due to clotting factor deficiency, factor 8 and factor 9. It's commonly in boys. It affects mostly boys, and it can cause severe bleeding depending on how severe the deficiency of the clotting factors. But luckily, this is one of those good conditions where we actually have a treatment and we have a cure. I mean, we're not a cure, but at least a treatment. So we can replace the missing factors. We can give it to the children and they'll be fine. So there's hope for those who may have hemophilia. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you again next week when I'll be discussing another important topic that has to do with the health of our children. Until then, I say have a wonderful day and keep supporting our children. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Are you a mother, father, or you are involved in caring for children? If yes, then listen to Ask the Pediatricians every Thursday by 10 a.m. for insightful discussion on popular child health topics such as dangerous child health practices, immunization, infant feeding, developmental milestones, and so much more. You also get to ask questions on these topics and listen to answers to real-life child health issues by a pediatrician. Ask the Pediatricians Foundation is devoted to health education and information of parents and caregivers of children in the community to support you in raising healthy children. Don't miss Ask the Pediatricians with Dr. Gbemi because it's informative, educative, and interactive. Ask the Pediatricians Hour, the program for caring parents.